All right, folks. Well, I think we're probably going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us here today to talk through the Social Stability and Growth Pathway Grant from United Way of Southwestern Indiana. We're excited to just talk through this grant opportunity with you today. We will have some opportunity to answer any questions you might have at the end. Basically, our goal for today is to walk through the grant purpose, the grant concept, some of the scope and priorities of the grant, and we will briefly show you a little bit of a quick click-through tutorial for accessing the grant on our portal and give opportunities to answer any questions you have. And hopefully, wrap up here in relatively short time. Hopefully, then we'll get you back to your day. But just to kick things off, many of you are probably familiar with United Way's Pathway to Potential's Community Impact Strategy. Our strategy is focused on upward mobility. That is really what United Way is all about. It is our singular goal for community impact. And upward mobility, just in a nutshell, is the goal of seeing our neighbors move up out of poverty to a better situation in their lives. And all of the funding streams of Pathway Through Potentials are built around that goal. But upward mobility is a complex concept. There are a lot of things that factor into it. First, and I would say foremost, we do want to think about economic justice for all members of our community. So that means things that will empower a living wage, things that will empower people to be able to support their families. That's very important. But we also want to think about other dimensions of upward mobility. Research and frameworks by partners like the Urban Institute would suggest that it's not just about having enough money to get by. Being upwardly mobile in your community also has a lot to do with your power and autonomy in that community. So as a vulnerable or a low-income member of our community, are you able to have autonomy over your life, or are you increasing your say-so and your power in the community? And beyond that, what about your sense of dignity and your sense of belonging in our community? All of these things are important to your upward mobility. And we believe that all of our pathways in some way enable some aspect of that upward mobility. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about social stability and growth. That is the Pathway Grant that is coming available now. And I think this Pathway Grant is really special because it really captures, I believe, a lot of the aspects of upward mobility. It can be relevant to economic justice. It can be relevant to power and autonomy. And it can absolutely be relevant to people's dignity and sense of belonging in their community. So we can talk about all of those things. And hopefully some of you guys are thinking about services and programs that you offer at your organizations that speak to those issues as well. So looking at the actual purpose of the Social Stability and Growth Grant. When we think about these issues surrounding our community, little just thought experiment here. If you think about sort of the bad stuff that a family can endure, whether that is poor health outcomes, physical health outcomes, or mental health outcomes, or higher rates of substance abuse, or higher rates of incarceration, or youth suicide, or lower educational attainment, all the kind of bad things that a family could end up experiencing or being able to say was the case for their family. All of those are sort of associated with one kind of common factor. And again, just associated with, correlated with, but that thing is poverty. That is, families raising their children in poverty are more likely to have experienced those negative outcomes. A wide range of social ills, negative outcomes, the bad stuff that you hope is not true for your family is all associated with raising your family in poverty. There's also a second kind of boogeyman out there that is associated with a lot of the bad stuff, associated with higher rates of substance abuse, associated with wage stagnation and poor economic outcomes, associated with poor mental health. And that is social isolation. And there is a lot of research, an increasing body of research that shows that despite our many tools for keeping in touch, social isolation is on the rise in our communities, in many, many communities. And unfortunately, it appears to be those with lower rates of formal education and lower economic status who report the most social isolation. That's very, very concerning. Just imagine if you have both of those things working against you. If you are both growing up poor and growing up socially isolated, you do not have a lot of people who have your back. You do not have a lot of strong social support. Just imagine how much the deck is stacked against you in that scenario. A lot of research on upward mobility, and this is particularly focusing on the more economic aspects of upward mobility. It shows that low-income people who have better social networks, they are the ones who are more likely to move forward with their upward mobility, especially economically. And it has a lot to do with sort of our common folk knowledge that it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. If you are well connected socially, there are just that many more opportunities that will be presented to you. Doors are going to open if you know people who can help open those doors for you. Kind of common sense, but there is a lot of research that actually backs up those findings. And so that is really the concept behind the Social Stability and Growth Grant. It's really all there in the name. It's about social. Social is the key word. So we're really thinking about this grant in terms of relationship building, in terms of supporting our clients, our low-income and vulnerable clients, social networks, their social capital, and how our organizations, our programs can support those things and help clients build their social networks and social capital. Because all the research bears it out, that's a very important thing for a vulnerable or a low-income person to have. If they have that tool in their tool belt, if they have a strong social network, they are much more likely to be able to withstand storms, both mental health related, economically, all types of different barriers that can present themselves may be overcome if they have strong social supports. So, diving a little bit more into what those social supports might look like. And this is introducing a little bit of the vocabulary, the vocab words of that you will see popping up in some of these grant documents. And if you're at all familiar with the literature, the research on this topic, and you've probably seen some of these terms before. So we don't use the word relationship quite as much. We'll oftentimes say things like social capital. And we tend to break social capital down into two categories, bridging and bonding. And you can get into very esoteric academic definitions of these things, but in a nutshell, bridging social capital are the relationships you have with people who are just not like you. They're different than you. And these relationships can be particularly beneficial because when you form a relationship with someone who is not like you, they are potentially able to connect you to new things. They may have access to stuff you don't have access to. They may have knowledge that you don't have. They may have skills that you don't have. These relationships may take the form of a formal coaching type of relationship, a mentor-mentee relationship. We also would look at things like cross socioeconomic status friendships. There's actually a lot of great research on just friendships that form naturally, social relationships where the two friends are of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and how beneficial that can be to a lower income person to get social connections to more affluent communities. That can be incredibly influential in a low-income person's life. For some of you who may be familiar with, there's a local training group here in Evansville, and they're actually nationwide, called Bridges Out of Poverty. If any of you have ever taken that training, some of this might sound familiar to you. It's that idea that if you are not familiar with a certain socioeconomic group, then you probably don't understand their rules, their norms, their expectations. But when you can form relationships with people who are familiar with those things and they can help sort of show you the ropes, then you are much more likely to be able to move in those circles and move forward in those communities yourself. So bridging social capital, it connects that, makes that bridge, gives you a ladder to potentially move into better socioeconomic groups, creates economic opportunities potentially. These can be very powerful types of relationships. And spoiler alert, the research around upward mobility, the economic aspects of upward mobility, it tends to focus a little bit more on these types of relationships, bridging social capital relationships. Now, that being said, this other type of relationship over here, bonding social capital. This is also very important in its own right, and we don't want to, diminish the importance of bonding social capital. Bonding social capital are the relationships with people who are very much like you. These relationships are important because they are just the practical getting through life type of relationships. It's having someone to call when your car breaks down. It's having that close friend, that your sister, your cousin, your neighbor, your best friend who you can call when you really need that important favor that helps you get through a crisis. Or that's the practical support that they may offer. Or from a mental health standpoint, the emotional support that they can offer. So helping you work through times of emotional distress. We all know that that could be incredibly important, having people who share a similar background, who can relate to some of the struggles that you've experienced. So bonding social capital is also incredibly important. So the title of this grant is no accident that we talk about social stability. A bonding social capital relationship is more likely to provide you stability. It's that bedrock relationship that helps you through the rocky times. And growth, social stability and growth, the bridging social capital relationships, those are the ones that are more likely to actually push you forward and propel you towards growth. So they're both important tools in the toolbox, both really, really beneficial for a vulnerable or a low-income person trying to move forward with their upward mobility. So these are the focuses of this grant. Now, we want to get into the actual grant application. Hopefully by this point, you are thinking about your organizations, you're thinking about the services and the programs that you offer, or potentially thinking about a pilot program or a new initiative that you've been hoping to bring to life. We need to talk about the actual parameters of this funding opportunity. So we'll spend a few minutes now talking through grant scope and grant priorities. Just again, vocab here, when we say scope, that's bare minimum eligibility to apply. And then priorities are, we can talk about the nice to haves, things that our grant committee would like to see. We have no expectation that every person will have, every program will have everything on the priority list, but that's okay. First and foremost, scope. So in case you haven't noticed yet or haven't picked up on the themes of the conversation, this is a relationship-oriented service grant. So if the programs that your organization offers are not relationship building or don't have some aspect of relationship building, then this is most likely not the grant for you. So if your services are, we come in and we provide a health screening and then we leave, this is not the grant for you. Or, we come in and we provide a food voucher and we leave. Okay, again, that's valuable. That could be an absolute lifeline to people. I'm in no way saying that those are bad programs. They just may not fit with this particular grant opportunity. Your program needs to be relationship oriented to fit with this grant. So next thing, and these are the very basic eligibility requirements. United Ways are geographically specific. If you didn't know that, we are restrained to funding only things in Vanderburgh, Warwick, and Spencer counties. So you do have to be a 501c3 to apply for our funding, and you do need to be serving either Vanderburgh, Warwick, or Spencer counties. And the money from United Way must only be used to provide services in those places. So if you are, for instance, providing services more regionally, we would need to see that your funds were being restricted to only serve clients in our particular service area. And when you were providing data back to us, you were reporting on clients only in our particular service area. So when you're filling out the application, if it asks for, you know, for instance, number of clients you have served, and maybe in the last year you served 150 people, and 100 of them were in Warwick County and 50 of them were in Gibson County, you just say, I served 100 people in Warwick County. That's the only thing that really counts for this grant. We are not able to consider outside county funding or outside county activities for our funding. Other note here, as I've mentioned, our focus is on upward mobility. Our focus is on serving low-income and vulnerable people. So another very important priority or scope eligibility criteria for this grant is that you are serving a majority low-income people. We do give a rough definition of what we mean by low income. That would be 185% of the federal poverty line. That's the same standard that is used for free and reduced lunch. So that should give you some, if you're not collecting very, very rigorous data on the income of your clients, you need to have some sense of the income of your clients. That's going to be important for us to understand. But for instance, if you are working with youth or the educational system, the free and reduced lunch standard is another kind of touch point that might be relevant for that data. And it does say majority, so we need to see at more than 50% of the people you are serving falling into that category. The other grant scope note that we of course need to speak about, obviously everyone applying for this grant is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, so it should go without saying that you are non-discriminatory in your service. You're not going to refuse service to any member of the community based on their particular membership in a protected class. But we do want to also say that if you have a certain targeted demographic or a certain targeted priority group, and you have a reason for prioritizing that group or focusing your service on that group, and your reason has to do with the fact that they are especially vulnerable, or that group has particular barriers, or they are overrepresented in poverty, we just want to state for the record, that is fine. That is not discriminatory. I would go on a limb and say that's not discriminatory. That is strategic and shows that you have an understanding of the issue of poverty. So if you are in fact prioritizing certain demographics because you're considering the disparities in our community, that is not discriminatory, and that is perfectly acceptable. And we'd like to probably understand more about your selection strategy. So there'll be some questions about that in the application. So that kind of gets us into conversations about grant priorities. And here I should sort of maybe pause and talk a little bit about how these priorities came to be, who came up with them, just so you guys know, when we create these grant documents, write the purpose statement, write the application, write the scoring criteria. This is not Margaret Stuckey sitting alone in a room in a vacuum writing all this stuff. United Way grants are all built by what we call expert task forces. So for depending on the grant topic, the experts that we will bring in to help us create the documents their backgrounds vary. So for our mental health grant, all of the professionals who help us create that grant are themselves mental health providers. They are psychologists, psychiatrists, clinical social workers, things of that nature. For our Thriving Next Gen grant, which focuses on youth services and partnerships with schools, all of the expert task force members there are themselves educators. We also do a lot of focus groups with the actual clients who may be using the services and things of that nature. So for this particular grant, social stability and growth, the priority is relationship building. There is no single professional profile that we look for in building our expert task force. But I will say we have a really interesting and diverse expert task force that has helped build this grant. So we have some folks with a little bit of an academic background, some expertise in academic expertise in this topic. We have some folks who are themselves retired but long-term social service providers, deep expertise in providing social services and understanding the social service landscape. We have some folks who are leaders of faith communities. We know that faith communities can be really, really powerful institutions for relationship building, community building, fostering great relationships, fostering bridging social capital. So we've got some great members of different faith communities who've been able to help serve as the expert task force. And we're also really happy that we have had some wonderful folks volunteer their time who are what we call our lived experience experts. So folks who themselves are people who have struggled with their upward mobility, have come from some of our more low-income neighborhoods or communities within our region, and have themselves utilized many of the social service organizations that we're familiar with in our region. And they have given a lot of feedback on the actual application and what kinds of questions we should be asking nonprofits and what kind of things we should be prioritizing when we evaluate responses. And so that team is the one who put forward these priority criteria. So knowing that, knowing that they're true experts on this, this is what they said they would like to see, or what they believe United Way should fund. One of the first things they said was service to families and a two-generational model. This does have a lot to do with United Way's larger strategy. We have some grants that are exclusively serving adults and some that exclusively serve children. We know that social stability and growth is our opportunity to fund more family-oriented services. And there's a lot of research that shows that a two-generational model, a program where both the adults of a household and the children of a household are engaged and participating in services, can be very, very impactful. So that would be a grant priority. And again, the priorities are the nice to haves, the things that might get you some extra points on the application, but are not at all mandatory. And we absolutely do not expect that there's going to be any unicorn out there that has all of these things. No one's going to be perfect. But some of the other things that we're looking for, as we've mentioned, very top of mind for a lot of people, both academics and researchers and people just out there living in the community. Social isolation is a major problem for a lot of people in a lot of communities. So programs that are actively thinking about this issue, programs that have strategies for fighting social isolation. So that may be relevant to how your program is conducting its outreach. How are you engaging with the community to maybe start communications with people who may be isolated, maybe aren't the ones approaching you and to fill out an application for services. Or how do you tackle this issue with the people who are actively engaged with you? So thinking about that and thinking about services that have solid strategies for addressing this issue and helping our community combat social isolation. Another grant priority, we always want to look for services that are using best practices and offering clients choice and autonomy and how they navigate your program, how they navigate your service is something we always like to see. So is your program and service customizable? Do clients have some level of choice in how they engage, or is it very prescribed and one size fits all? Another priority aspect would be focusing on the ALICE population. And I should explain that a little bit. When we say ALICE, for the most part, we mean folks who are low income, but are not in active crisis. So they have more or less met their basic needs, but are still struggling economically. We tend to put the focus on that community because populations who are maybe a little bit more severely in crisis, so maybe, folks like who are street homeless, for instance, they need to be prioritizing other things. They probably need to be prioritizing basic needs, uh, physical safety and stability before they can be launching into something that is more social capital and relationship oriented. Another priority that the expert task force has discussed a lot is programs that promote long-lasting relationships. So some programs, really do a wonderful job providing a service. There is a relationship built between a professional who is a service provider and a client, and that relationship can be very beneficial to the client, but it is temporary. It has a shelf life, and when the client graduates from the program, terminates services, what have you, that relationship's basically done. So we would love to see programs that promote relationships that have the ability to continue on and outlast the enrollment of a social service program. That would be another thing that we would like to see. And last but not least, as I mentioned before, since this is a grant that is associated with the goal of upward mobility, we will be giving some priority to programs that have an aspect of bridging social capital to them. Now, if your program is more bonding social capital in nature, you're doing something like community building in a neighborhood or family therapy or family building, I would still certainly encourage you to apply. I have every expectation that we will seriously consider and fund some bonding social capital programs as well. But there is going to be some edge given in the scoring to bridging social capital programs. So we want to be transparent about that going in. All right, so that kind of gives you the lay of the land. I'm sure at this point, some of you are thinking about your programs and have some questions about, okay, am I going to fit? Am I going to fit with this this RFP? Does this make sense for me? As I mentioned before, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of this call. But if you would like to have a more nuanced conversation, I am happy to meet with you. So my contact information is here, and you can always reach out to United Way. I'm happy to set up some time to do a Zoom call with you, talk through your proposal idea, talk about your program, and help you think about how you would like to present your case for the application, or consider whether or not this is a fit for you. So I'm always happy to do that with people. Just reach out and we can get something scheduled. And next thing I want to make sure we let everybody know is the timeline associated with this grant. So you will see the application is open today. It is effective today, and it will close 1 month from today. So that is Friday, April 4th. The deadline is 5 p.m. on the 4th. It is not midnight. So please do not call me frantically panicking at 11:50 p.m. That will not work. 5 p.m. deadline on Friday the 4th. And just to give you a sense of the flow of this project, there are multiple rounds of review that your proposal will go through. But the most important thing that you should be aware of is that all of this will culminate in the United Way June board meeting. The final vote on who gets funded and who doesn't will take place in United Way's June board meeting. Grantees will be announced in late June, and the official grant period will begin July 1st. Another thing, just so people are aware, and I try to show this slide in all of our webinars, just so people are aware of how they're being evaluated. Your proposal will be evaluated on multiple dimensions. So the most important thing is down here, you will be evaluated as I said, by that expert task force to really determine how well they believe your proposal fits with this grant purpose. Does it align with those priorities that we put forward? Is it a good fit for this purpose of building up low-income people's social capital? We do also want to be transparent that you will also be evaluated on some financial aspects of your organization. United Way will not fund an organization that is not financially sound. So you have to provide some financial documentation, not just for your program, but for the organization as a whole. And there will be a separate evaluation of that. So that is also very important. And then the data relevant to your particular financial request of United Way, and really how far you're going to be able to stretch those dollars, how you'll be utilizing that funding. That's also something that will be evaluated and taken into account. All of that will be relevant in deciding which programs are given funding and which are not. All right, so I'm watching, we're coming up on time here. Very quickly, I did want to just give a very brief overview. I know many of you have already seen it. In order to access this grant opportunity, you will need to use United Way's grant portal, which can be accessed on our website. So go to unitedway.org, scroll to the footer. There is a button that says EC Impact Sign In, and there's another screen for clicking to sign in. You may need to create an account or sign in if you already have one. Once you are signed into your account, there is a sidebar option for register for new grant opportunities. Social Stability and Growth is the only active grant opportunity at this time. So click continue, and there'll be several screens to click through to register your organization as interested in this grant opportunity. And then once you have registered your organization, you will have to actually talk about the particular program within your organization that is seeking funds. A pop-up box will show here. If you've engaged with United Way before and you've listed your program in United Way's portal before, it may be available in a drop-down box and you can just select it. Or if not, you can, create the program and add some details. It's at that point you'll be asked to fill out the eligibility criteria, and that is simply the things we talked through earlier, the basic scope criteria. You are a 501c3, you are operating in our service area, you are providing services to majority low-income people, things of that nature. If you can't say yes to all of those things, you will not be able to move forward. Once you have done that, you should have all of these forms assigned to you, both organizational forms and forms related to the program seeking funds. Other little helpful hints, over on your sidebar, there is a resource center. If you click into there, that is where you will be able to, you can download a full Word document that has, rather than clicking through link by link by link for the different sections in EC Impact, this has the full application in a single Word document for you, which I know I've written many grants myself. It's very helpful to have a document for drafting and working through your responses before you actually upload and submit. You will need to submit in the grant portal, though. We will not just accept your Word document. And also your newly refreshed 2025 federal poverty guidelines, in case you have not reviewed those yet. Those are very relevant. Other things to be aware of at the bottom of every page. Once you're done, you will need to save your work and mark it's complete. And another note for those of you who have not written for a United Way grant before, in all of your narratives, I would strongly encourage you to refer to your organization as our organization or our agency, and refer to your program as the program or our program. The reason that I ask you to do this is because we're going to redact it anyway. So this will just make our lives a lot easier. All of our grant review processes are blind. So reviewers do not know the names or specific details of the proposals that they are reviewing. We do this to eliminate bias as much as possible. So we will be taking the names out if you leave them in. So help us out as much as possible and just don't use proper names. And once you have everything completed and you have hit that save and mark as complete button, everything will have a status of ready to submit. It is only once every single form has the status that you will be able to submit the application. Please note that you don't actually have to have your full board of directors sign off, because I think we've removed that requirement, but you do need to have both your executive director and a board president signing off on this application. Pathway grants are typically larger grants. We're seeing people request hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding. For a grant submission of that size, we need to know your board is aware of that request of that size. So we do ask that you're both an executive director and board president confirm they're aware of this submission. All right, and that kind of brings us to the end of our time. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And at this point, if there are any questions, we can take time for questions. And if not, we can adjourn. And this meeting recording will be available for everybody just for your review. And you can pass it along to other organizations if you think they would be interested. The Q&A function is available. So if you have a question, I'm looking at the chat now.
Yeah, Margaret, there's one question about, can you speak to efficiency? And that was on the graph you showed where you put the programs in a quadrant. Is
Yes.
Efficiency more of an output or an outcome related concept?
So efficiency is more output related, and that we are talking about financial efficiency. So it is the amount of money that you want from United Way relative to not just the number of people that will be served. That's the driving factor, but in addition to the number of people, we will apply various weighting factors based on United Way's priorities. So United Way has some internal priorities for different populations that we want to prioritize service to, and we will apply weighting factors. So with the application of those weighting factors, we will be able to come up with a number of the weighted number of prioritized individuals served versus how much money you need to serve them. And that's how efficient you are. So, I mean, let's be realistic here. If you intend to serve 10 kids, do not ask for $1 million. It's not going to happen. That being said. Other questions? Deanna, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead. I think we have people's mics live. Ashley, do we?
I think they will need to unmute to speak. Let me jump in the Q&A.
Yeah, Deanna, I think if you come off mute, you should be able to, or if not, if you can use the chat or the Q&A. I see you've got your hand up.
Oh, okay.
It's telling us you can't unmute. Okay, Deanna, you cannot unmute. Can you put your question in the chat or the Q&A box?
All right, Margaret,
Thanks,
we've got one in the Q&A, RMHC, which I think is Ronald McDonald House Charities, Care Mobile, I think it's the actual vehicle, is trying to improve infant and maternal mortality numbers in Vanderburgh, prioritizing mothers and children up to a year old. Would we qualify?
Well, I would really need to know more details about the program, but again, I would just encourage you to think about, is it focused on relationship building and, building the social supports of those families. If you can say yes to that, then I would encourage you to explore the application and see if you can address the questions. And if you would like to have a lengthier conversation, then, by all means reach out. We can do some office hours. But the crux of the matter is your program focused on building relationships? Okay, Deanna, you've got the question there was popping up. I think that was in the chat. Will we be able to get other staff who will be helping with the grant access to the grant? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So if you have other staff members who you would like to have create a EC Impact account for, please reach out to me. I can help you create additional user accounts in EC Impact. That is not an issue. Just shoot me an email and we can get that taken care of. Any other questions? Hopefully we've got you all thinking about your programs, thinking about the pilot ideas that you've been just absolutely burning to get off the ground. United Way, just another note that I should make is that United Way is open to funding pilot ideas. However, I will just caution you, if you do have a pilot idea that is relevant to this topic, please come armed with data, do your homework, do your research. United Way, they're not going to fund something that's just a random pipe dream, but if it is well grounded in research and data that suggests that it will be effective, something that has a little bit of proof of concept, this, potentially something that has worked in other markets, that may be something that United Way would be interested in funding. So pilots are fair game. It's always worth mentioning. Okay, how do you quantify relationships? Ted is asking, how do you quantify relationships across socioeconomic segments? Okay, so that is something that we will ask specific questions about in the application. But we gave the definitions of the socioeconomic breakdown. So we're defining low income as 185% of the federal poverty guideline or below. That would be like a target client range. And moderate income, we have a definition of that. We would define economically stable as someone who is, approximately 300% of the federal poverty guideline. But for working purposes, if someone is a, stable middle class person, upper middle class person who, is financially sound, not struggling financially, that would, and has the potential to be a mentor to a person who is in poverty and actively struggling financially, that might be the type of relationship that would make sense. Oh, and there was a question, is this a multi-year grant? Yes, this is a 2-year grant. Thank you for that question. I should have clarified that earlier. All of our pathway grants are 2-year grants. So those 4 pathways that I showed in the very first slide, we cycle through those every other year.
All right, Margaret, we've got one over in the Q&A section. Will collaborative grants receive priority?
Not necessarily. So there is no points, baked into the rubric that say give more points just because this is a collaborative grant. That's nowhere does it say that. However, if by collaborating you can say this proposal will be able to reach more people with less money, or by collaborating we're able to provide a wider array of services, then you just may be more competitive. If that's the case, then you may get an edge that way. But there's nothing that says collaboratives are inherently better just because they're collaboratives. Collaborate if it makes sense to collaborate. And Va has asked, Margaret, could you clarify if there is preference for bridging or bonding relationships for this grant? Yes, there is a actual points preference for bridging relationships because research shows for the purposes of economic upward mobility, it is those bridging relationships that are more beneficial. For stability purposes, you need that bonding as well. But this time around, the expert task force did feel that there should be some priority given to bridging social capital programs. But again, I do want to emphasize if your program is all about bonding and supporting the bonds of existing relationships or peer relationships, that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. You may also be a very competitive candidate, even if you are a bonding social capital program. So don't think you're disqualified if you're not doing bridging social capital. It's not like a make or break points difference. Hope that clarifies. Okay. I'm looking at Q&A. Do we have, nope. And chat looks to be clear. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there are any more questions, so we can go ahead and wrap it up. As always, folks, I am happy to take any questions that you might have. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to set up a time to talk. And I look forward to seeing the proposals as they come in. Thank you all so much for your time. Have a good one.